All right, we're ready for the last one. His name is Daniel Murawsky, and he's going to speak on a government only Mars could create. So let's give him a hand, our warm hand for him. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. Hi. I might be a little nervous because this is one of my first conference talks. I've given a lot of... Thanks. Yeah, I'm in good company for sure. Yeah. I'm also a little nervous because you guys might hate this talk, but I think it's one we need to hear, probably. But before we get to the part that you might hate, I wanted to talk a little about why I'm giving this talk, because it seems to be proposing that I think I know what the best government for Mars would be. And that's not the case at all. But I think I do have something to offer in what we need to do to create a government that only Mars could create. So it's really about the opportunity that Mars is presenting. I really believe that we are seeing an opportunity that we will never see in the history of humanity again. Because this could set the precedent for the kind of government you set up on new planets. And we've never set up a planet or a government on a new planet, so we're really able to kind of take advantage of this new ground that's before us. And so my talk is about how we can best take advantage of this blank slate that we've been given from a political science perspective. And in talking and kind of formulating my ideas that I was going to present, I'm going to check if I can turn this on. Being blinded by blue light, which I hear is bad for your eyes. So, where was I? Yeah. Yeah. So when we go to Mars, we'll have an opportunity that we've never had before, and we'll never have again. Well, anyways, my main idea that I'd like to propose for the government that I think would allow for the best use of this opportunity is something called immutability. Does anybody know what immutability is? I would be very surprised. Right. So it's a computer science term. I'm a computer geek, so I kind of went to that for my inspiration. And I actually have been very inspired by this really geeky computer term. Immutability is where instead of modifying something, like you see in our government today, if you want to make a change to a law, I don't know if you guys have ever tried to read the changes that they make to laws, but you cite things all over the place and it gets really complicated really fast, and the senators and congressmen don't even read the laws because they're so difficult to read. I mean, they'll propose, somebody will propose a 100-page modification to the core of our society, and the majority of the people voting on this that have direct votes don't even know what it's got inside of it, or at least not to the fullest extent. They know what they should vote, but they don't know why. So immutability is the proposition that instead of making modifications to the government, you wholesale rewrite the government every single time, whether it be a year, 4 years. That sounds, I'm looking at his face, that sounds like a lot of, he's like, oh my God. And the way you do this in computer science is you copy the previous data into the new one, the ones that you want to keep. And that seems like it's not that different, but the overall effect, I'll talk a little bit about computer science. The overall effect is a huge gain in efficiency. Not at first. At first, if you know the change you want to make, it's right there and you can just go make it. And that's easier than rewriting the whole, these are objects in computer science. But as soon as you get past, like, it's like 10 objects, so you could say 10 times the basic modification that you would make. The immutable objects become absolutely more efficient. They don't go up at all. It doesn't become any harder to create a law or create an object than it was, you know, to create that kind of more complicated object. So what you would see, I think, in government is you would see that it would be a little harder to make a change to the legal system. But it would be much easier as soon as it becomes just a tiny bit more complicated for humans to understand. You would see people also being able to be much more involved in the legal process because, and this kind of leads me to another topic that I'm going to diverge into. But before I do that, so the main idea is that immutability would provide a more efficient way to change the laws. I think we can all agree that the way we change laws now isn't efficient, and so this is a proposition for that. So recently, Elon Musk said that he talked a little bit about government. I don't know if anyone saw it, but it was pretty much that he thinks it should be a direct democracy, and that if we have a direct democracy, it should be a little bit harder to create laws than it is to destroy them. And I think this touched on a really good point, that right now the main thing missing from our government system is destruction. And I'm a little bit into Indian philosophy, and they have a very balanced view of the universe. There's creation, preservation, and destruction, and you have to have them all in perfect balance or things break down. I mean, we see this in California right now. There used to be periodic, very isolated wildfires in California. And we do prescribed burning back in Florida where I am to keep things from getting too dry and too abundant, too much fuel, so that you have these huge fires that take people's homes down. And so that's just one example that's very relevant right now of you have to have destruction as part of the process. If you prevent it, if people prevent the little tiny bits of destruction that you need, you don't have any control over when it eventually builds up and things fall apart, which is what I think we'll maybe see in America eventually, because these laws, I follow every law that's signed by the president, I read, and it's insane. I don't even know how they maintain it. I mean, most of it's post offices, but it's insane that the ones that they do try to pass, I can't understand it, that's for sure. So with this idea of destruction, that also kind of feeds into the immutability that you get. Or destruction is what you get with immutability. It's very easy to destroy a law. You just don't recreate it. You just don't copy it into the next thing. So you can wholesale copy an entire law that everyone agrees is working into the new government. But you don't have to. And this could be in a simple direct democracy voting system where any point in the period of the lifetime of a law, say it's 2 years, you give laws like a time to live. Say the period of the years when it needs to be renewed is 2 years. Anytime anybody can go and vote yes or no, and then that so they don't have to read, the entire government all on voting day, and vote on every single one. This can be something that's staggered with technology these days. It's very easy, and so the reason I think that's so important is because, bringing it back to the opportunity, that would be the ideal government for quick experimentation and iteration. And I think we all have seen the effects, especially in Silicon Valley and everything, of quick iteration. And SpaceX is a perfect example, stark contrast between SpaceX and NASA. SpaceX is faster at developing things. I mean, considering where they're at compared to, in their lifetime compared to other space organizations, it's incredible. So I think that it would be a much more efficient government that would allow for much more experimentation. And if we can overcome some of the obstacles to creating a new government period, which I don't have time to go into, things like debt or other interests, the people who are going there are going to be indebted to the governments and the corporations that send them there. So if we can overcome stuff like that, which is a whole different talk, then I think we could have an opportunity to really see an amazing new government. And only Mars can give us this, because everywhere else is taken on Earth, and everywhere else comes with, its own baggage. And one of the things I would like to see on Mars is the cooperation required for government. And Mars is also uniquely qualified for that, because what is cooperation? What creates cooperation? Why did everyone get behind the mission to the moon? Why did everyone get behind SpaceX and stuff like that? Is that there was this sense of purpose and mission that you only get when you get the right group of people with the right minds and the right interests and working together in one direction. Well, we're already going to have that on Mars. Everyone who goes to Mars, everyone who's a Martian, a part of the first Martian government, will have a lot of similar and complementary kind of principles and ideas. And, like even if there's an engineer and a pastor, right? I always get them wrong, pastor. They're going to have very similar interests and very similar goals, mainly survival at first. But that really binds people together. When you struggle, you really get to know the people around you, and you need their help. You have real incentive to cooperate. And so I know that's not going to be forever on Mars, hopefully. Hopefully we won't be fighting for survival 24/7 for the rest of Mars. But I really think that when you lay that foundation, you'll have the best foundation to create a new government. And if you give them the right governmental system where they can experiment and really develop a new government based on new ideas, then you could have the best government ever, ever possibly created. So, like I said, my talk's about opportunity, and I think that's really what we have here. And I tried to actually go online and talk to people about this, and that's why I said you're not gonna really like this talk, because I really think that it comes down to the people who go there, and getting us there, not just getting us there technologically. Like the pastor was saying at the religion panel, he was saying, we know the hows, we know the whats we're gonna do, what we're gonna do when we get there, but we really have to consider the whys. And I really think that if you can give people the right whys, and get people to support those whys and sending those people there, and I really don't think it should be commercial interest, but that might be unavoidable. Motivation is the big problem. Also on that panel, somebody talked about, like, we don't have any motivation to go to Mars because of X, Y, and Z. Religion could be the motivation. I don't think that would work, but I'll leave that to smarter people. But I think creating a new government that would give everyone in that government the opportunity to live better lives, and then be able to take those principles and apply them back on Earth, is something maybe people could get behind. I think it's pretty cool. How am I doing on time? Okay. That was a lot of words, short period of time. Yeah, I'd love to take questions.
So I understand that the principle of immutability is the idea that every time you make, in this case, a system of laws,
Yeah.
you begin from the beginning,
Yes.
without necessarily referring to what you had before. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so you begin with blank slate.
Well, not referring to, and I mean that in a very literal sense, like making references to. Instead of searching through the code, the whole US code, and thinking like, okay, what do I need to consider to make this change, and blah, 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 which is what they do now, you literally can just rewrite the whole law if you want. And people can say, that's the old law, this is the new law. I don't care about the old law anymore, I want the new one. Exactly. Get rid of all it. And that's exactly the same problem computers have that is solved with immutability. When they have to go through and figure out memory addresses and it gets all complex, it causes problems. And we're not computers, even.
So because laws are so massive normally, and the way of doing things gets so exaggerated and deep,
Yeah.
would you propose having a team of people that would take sections and look at this and maybe in small communities make their decisions on ethics, on relationships, whatever it might entail, legalities of whatever legalities you might want to identify.
So should we have some committees and representatives and stuff?
Right.
I say committees, yes, representatives, no. Committees make sense, experts, of course, but I don't think they should be making any decisions. And the way I think this is possible, because you mentioned that laws get so complex, you would need people that are experts in these fields. Well, I think that if you start at the beginning, like if you went back to 83, when we created our first constitution and stuff, you would see that it was something that someone could read and understand and feel inspired by, just the whole thing, our whole government. The average Joe knew the entire thing, you know, and fell in love with it. And if I went back and read farmers and stuff that, you know, would defend the Constitution with their lives and stuff like that, it's really amazing. So I think it would be a lot simpler, and everyone should be able to understand it. That should be a requirement. It's crazy that I'm into this stuff and I just cannot understand our government.
Well, I certainly agree that the way the U.S. code is written now is suboptimal. The thing that concerns me is that if you don't refer back to the rest of the laws, you in fact don't know what the legislature. I mean, I admit that it's scandalous that representatives vote on things if they don't know what they mean.
Yeah.
But even if you have the text in front of you, if you don't know the context of the rest of the laws, you in fact still don't know what you're voting on. That's why if you don't go back and do the research to see how is this law going to affect everything else, it's the same problem almost. See what I'm saying?
Totally, I see what you're saying. And I would ask you to look at lawyers, who that's their profession, you know, reading these laws. If it was, yeah, constitutional lawyers, but even the basic lawyers have to know the municipal laws that they function in and everything. And it's become a language in itself and a problem for any average person to read, because we were okay with that. We got to the point where, you know, the Constitution kind of bred all these different offshoots. And then there was constitutional law, and then there was municipal law. And so what I'm suggesting is that you wouldn't have to reference all these other laws. You wouldn't have to know the greater context every time you voted on, well, you would, but you would be able to know the greater context when you vote on these individual laws. I'm not saying it would be easy, but I think if you do start with that foundation, then we can get there. We're humans, we develop, and these will be incredibly intelligent people we're sending to Mars. So I feel like we might have a good chance of people like having a real. Yeah.
Yeah, listening to the first part of your talk, I don't see debt as a problem, because you could have we could vote in the U.S. for a new constitutional convention, and we could restructure our own government, but it wouldn't change the government debt. The problem with debt is the problem of, does the government make enough money from taxing or whatever to be able to pay off the debt? I think the problem that you have is that whenever you have a government, you have people with jobs. And that means they make money. And I'm not saying this in a disparaging way, but I mean, that's how they make their livelihoods. And I would think that you could make a lot of progress along the lines that you want to go if you so much of the social regulations on.
Oh, yeah.
And therefore, if the people decide, well, we don't need, people to make buggy whips anymore, nobody's really threatened by that.
Right. Yeah, if you go back and you read, like I was talking about, I read the stories of farmers back in, the early 1800s, a little bit in the late 1700s, but most of it's from the early 1800s. And they loved the idea of general welfare. When the first proposal that betrayed general welfare, in the Constitution, the preamble, it talks about you shouldn't do anything unless it helps everyone. Nothing, no specific groups. And I know that might make me unpopular, but that's what was written. And the first proposal that betrayed that was for a Navy officer's wife. They were like, let's take care of this. He served the country. Let's take care of this woman. They said no. And they were like, nope, that betrays general welfare. The second one was in Washington, D.C., very close to home. An apartment building burned down with women and children living there. They're like, we can't just sit here and not do anything. We have this huge treasury of tax money. Let's just help them out. But since then, we've seen a drastic decline in that and the obeyance, I guess you could say, of general welfare. So it's become much less voluntary. People don't just volunteer to help the poor people as much. They maybe will give to a shelter, but they expect other people to do it, for sure. So I think that if we could go back to when the senators and the people saw that we were betraying general welfare and be like, okay, well, obviously that law didn't work. We need to rewrite it so that we don't lose track of our tax money and start, messing up the process. We could have stuck more to the voluntary. We could have been truer to that. So. That's the big problem. I don't see a way. I don't think there is a way. This talk is completely useless because I really don't know how you would do that. Because it's going to be military people going there. Military people are traditionally very devoted to where they come from. Not just military people, but mostly. And so, yeah, that's the big problem that definitely undermines this whole talk. Let me get him real quick, and then, yeah.
What you described about legislation was the equivalent to that in budgeting is zero-based budgeting. So you might find an example there.
Okay.
You don't add to the budget from the previous year. You start over with a clean slate. So every program that had a budget has to justify having a budget.
Yeah, that would be amazing.
And you can do that legislation-wise. It's good.
Yeah.
I gave a similar talk a while, 2 or 3 years ago.
Oh, really?
Where I said the core of law should be 1,000 pages locked, and then when you go to something like
that'd be
business
amazing.
law, 500 pages, pharmaceutical law, whatever. So as it branches out, the branches get smaller and smaller.
That makes sense,
So
yeah.
that no matter how specialized you don't get outside the range of what a person can know.
Yeah.
Because many can have laws that are, a legal library would fill this room to the end, and I've been in them.
Yeah.
With books. You can't be accountable for all that, and a lot of you don't know is a law that you're working with. So
Right.
everyone is
Yeah,
allowed
totally.
to do that.
And you have a good excuse for breaking it, really.
From your point of view, what features of our society should we take with us on Mars or which not? For example, let's take nation states, one of main and from my point of view craziest invention of mankind.
Right.
That's, for example, for us to come here, we had visit many offices, fill in many papers. In case you want to visit, watch our ballet in Moscow for one night, you have to do the same. It's nation states. So we're talking about government on Mars.
Yeah.
What level of government do you mean? Either a single Mars level government, or it is, and I know another concept of thinkers, that they say there should be only no nations, but cities on Mars.
Okay.
Municipal level.
Right.
Just
Small government.
yeah.
Big fan.
So did you think about this regional differentiation
governments?
I did. And I don't think, anything I say here, but I don't think anything we do or figure out here will affect that, because it'll be thousands of people before we have a government, but it won't be until, I mean, if hopefully, probably more, but it won't be until we have hundreds of thousands of people, which is, because of the way we get to Mars is going to be a long time, and if we reproduce even, it's going to be generations. So I see, whatever we talk about here only being effective to the first government that is on Mars. Not to be dismissive, if I had to dream, yes, small government all the way. I'm totally for small government, so municipals would be ideal. Yeah.
But I think it's still a valid question, because if we're talking about the challenge of instituting something on Mars, we're all recognizing that we're going to be bringing with us what we have here.
Mm-hmm.
Developing the idea within this context and putting it into practice in this context is a method of training ourselves for what we want to attain.
Right, right. Would it work at scale? It's a question I face a lot at computer programming, and we should consider that. But I got to stick to my guns. I really don't think I'm qualified or have thought about it enough. But two, if we have my ideal society where there's experimentation up front as the foundation, that experimentation would ideally determine what's better, large cities or large governments or small governments. That's something I want to see empirically. So it is a very, very valid question. I just don't understand how I could help with that answer.
One issue that I guess I continue to explore is the reality of the possibility of always starting over.
Right.
And, you mentioned the Constitution of the United States and we're trying to bring it higher, and I will flatter myself to say that the serious stupid, but you can't actually understand the Constitution of the United States without having some understanding of the common law upon which a lot of the terms are defined. And I mean, there's sort of a naive idea of original understanding of U.S. constitutional law that says, oh, it's just anyone can read this and understand it. That's not really true. Like a government, the system of laws is like this massive undertaking that no one mind can really comprehend. I mean, if you're a lawyer, you don't study the law in this huge sense. You do, but then you go study a really small
Right.
part of it and try and understand that. And
Yeah, no, I totally admit that I could be totally underestimating how hard it would be to.
There's another principle is that you kind of do need a relatively static constitution of guaranteed rights and responsibilities as a bootloader for practicability for your laws from that point. So you leave that in place for everything beyond that.
So
In terms of regulation is really-
I am suggesting that we don't do that, which sounds radical, because we worked very hard to create those laws and those guidelines and checks and balances and stuff. But if you look at the history of creating the Constitution, a lot of it's based on the Massachusetts Constitution, and that was one man. That was John Adams. He did the bulk of the work for sure. But the rest of it is a story of compromise between slave owners and people who were against slavery, compromise between the rich and the people who, related more to the poor, I guess you could say. And I think we weakened the Constitution with those compromises. I really do. I'm not a serious student of the Constitution. I've read it many times, but like he said, it's very complicated. It's very hard to understand. But from what I've read of the compromises and what I've read of the effects that it's had over time and the ways that it's failed, the ways that we no longer follow the Constitution in many ways, I really do believe that it would have been better to rewrite it 100 times over at this point.
All right, I think that's an interesting point, but you don't have any framework whatsoever for, I mean, you must at least have a rule for amendment, right? Because otherwise, then like the entire thing is going to fall to pieces, right? Because you could just, the majority today could decide that Reverend Heiser over here should be the dictator of the universe.
Yeah.
And not only is you know, I mean, you see my point, like you
Yeah,
have no fixed rules at all.
Becomes easily manipulated by demagogues.
Yeah.
Well, more than that, it's not, doesn't have any real structure at all.
Right, but every reset opens up to that. There have been a few attempts along these lines historically,
I would love to hear about those. Yeah.
and yeah, typically they end tragically, but
Okay.
the closest analogy
It's not
I
good.
can think of to what you're positing, but it's still left an unchanged core of law, was the system of law in the Icelandic Republic, which terminated in the 1200s, where the responsibility of the law speaker was to repeat 1/3 of the law from memory every year. And so that if the law wasn't spoken every 3 years, it passed out of the code. Now the
Okay.
problem was that, I mean, it was an interesting form of government, and you had 36 rulers who were working in conjunction with the law speaker, where you essentially chose your Gothar from among those individuals who represent you in the parliament.
Right.
And if the law, again, if the law wasn't repeated every 3 years, it ceased to be law.
Right.
Aside from, of course, the law that set up the entire politics to begin with, so
Right.
you actually had this structure of government. So you had a core constitutional law, and you had a changeable national law.
Right.
But the whole thing fell apart in the end because scalability problems. One of the problems we run into in any of these systems is that you have to think of this in terms of distributed computing. You need communities that are all very small, where it's possible for all the pieces to know each other, and where if one goes insane, the other communities have the ability to correct them. Or if you have one massive state with a body of law that goes extinct every triennium, the probability of the entire system being taken over by a demagogue is greatly accelerated. Thus, Madison Federalist number 10, in terms of why you don't do exactly what you talk about.
Triennium is 3 years? 3 years, okay. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I'm less concerned with bringing in the concrete advantage of the politician, but I mean, your biggest protection against anything like that happening is precisely on the core of constitutional law, which is immutable and very strong legislative branch.
Right. So to that, I would say that's one of my other points, is that if we were to implement this form of government in a prison right now, it would fall apart very quickly, very quickly. But if you get a large group of very well-trained and educated, cooperative people that's already been preset to be balanced, put them through a lot of trials and all this stuff I said, to solidify that relationship, you know, where it's pretty much a family, it's our best chance at creating a better government, better than we've ever seen or could possibly understand right now from our perspective. So that's really what I'm proposing, is not that this is the best form of government. It would not work on Earth at all. It's that it would be the form of government that would give the most freedom to the creators of the government over a long period of time. So not setting things in stone is kind of the whole point. Because if you set anything in stone from the very beginning, you're saying a lot. And the fewer things you set in stone, the more you're saying of what's a priority for the society. But I think priorities can be misunderstood and they can change. Like slavery was a huge priority for a lot of the people in America. And I think it's undeniable that affected the foundations of our country.
You understand you have an unchanging law in the law that sets forth the fact that you do this every fixed period of time.
Right. So
the point is,
to your point, to your question, that would be changeable. If they wanted to create that for him being the ruler of the universe for the rest of time, technically that's fair game. But I would hope they would appreciate the qualities of freedom that immutability give them. Oh, wow. Yeah, thank you.